Hey everyone, my name is Dr. Dolores Tarver. I'm a licensed psychologist here in Georgia, and it is time for the TT Time with Dr. Tarver. Is a wellness podcast. It is not intended to be a substitute for a relationship with a licensed mental health provider. Yes, I'm back. I took the week off last week. Had a long extended weekend at a cluster, which is just a workshop, a series of workshops for the weekend. And so I just couldn't make it work last week. Sometimes we just have to take those opportunities to do what we can. So I am back this week, refreshed and excited and reinvigorated. I got a lot of good information. I'll give you all a reel this week to drop some nuggets. I've gotten some good words, and you all know I like to share a good word. So when last I was here, I was talking about what you're planning in preparation for harvest. And we're going to continue along in this series as we finish out the rest of January, just talking about the things that will allow us to be able to be successful in reaching our goals and the obstacles that interfere with us being able to do that. And that is regardless if you have New Year's resolutions or not, if you're just at a point where you're taking stock, reestablishing what your goals may have been, resetting. There may have been some things that have happened to cause you to have to reset and look at some things differently. So making sure that you're in a position to be able to give yourself a good evaluation, and not good meaning that you're going to allow yourself to pass with flying colors, but good in that you're strategic about what you're evaluating and making sure that those tools are things that are going to allow you to be able to really discern whether what you're doing is working or not. So I want to just hit a few things today, and we're going to be focusing on whether or not you are setting yourself up to be in this process of giving yourself some compassion, or if you're being complacent. So a lot of times people will ask me about whether or not they are engaging in self-care, balancing that with reaching goals. And oftentimes where the challenge is, people either do not give themselves self-care and they're completely goal focused. So they are pushing themselves to the max, not getting good rest, not hydrating, not exercising, not taking time away, not vacationing, only working, grinding. And there are periods in your life where you're going to need to do that for whatever reason. It may be that there was a financial setback because there may have been a change in the income stream coming in. There might have been some unexpected expenses that you have to pay for. It might have been some choices that were made that put you in situations where you're in debt, so you now have to take on other things in order to be able to get yourself out of debt. You might be in a place where you're trying to build a savings for a particular thing that you're trying to purchase. You may be in a situation where you were physically able to do some things, then you had to go out for a surgical procedure, for example. Now you're back, so you're working extra because there was a time when you couldn't work. So now you're trying to make up for that and get caught up on some things. You may have been in a season where you needed to help somebody fund something, or you may be in a season where you put something on hold because some other things came up in your life. So now you're pulling that thing off the back burner, bringing it back to the front so you can focus on it. So there are a lot of different reasons why at periods in our life where we may be working hard and maybe excessively working in order for us to be able to reach a goal, but it's something that's short term, it's not something that's long term. And in those moments, truthfully, you want to take as much care as you can, but I do understand that there may be a time frame or a timeline or a strategic plan that you just have to push a little harder for a certain amount of time. I just want you all to be mindful that you don't want to do that long term. What ends up happening, we've talked about this before, too much of that stress hormone, cortisol gets in that bloodstream, then you start having other kind of health problems. So that's the one category. Today I want to focus on the other category, which are the people who oftentimes will say, I need to take care of myself, I'm going to take a step back. But that ends up being more of your pattern and not necessarily something that's part of a process. So let's get into it a little bit. I think it's really important for us to understand when we're trying to determine whether we're being compassionate or being complacent, what our goals are. You're going to hear me throughout this series talk about your goals. What is it that you're actually trying to achieve? What are you trying to accomplish? What's the game plan? What's the strategy? Because if you don't know what that is, it's going to be very difficult for you to meet it. And oftentimes, why we're inconsistent with things is because we're not clear about what our goals are. We're not clear about what we're working toward. And so when you don't have that clarity, then that means that there are going to be a lot of obstacles that are going to get in the way. You're going to be focused on things that aren't necessarily relevant, going to be sidetracked. So if you're in that space where you're recognizing that you stop, one of the reasons why you stop may be that you're not clear on your goals. And it's important for you to be able to understand what your process is in reaching a goal. For some people, they have long-term goals, they have short-term goals. Those short-term goals may have subcomponents. So there are smaller things that I'm working toward to get to the goals. Those goals are a part of a larger plan that works together at the end. For example, you all know I have talked about this book for a long time. I actually did complete the book. I got the book reviewed by someone, and I have an appointment coming up to speak with an editor about the book. But that book was a lot of steps. And the reason why the book was a lot of steps is because even though I had a clear outline for the book, I had not carved out the appropriate time to be able to consistently work on the book. So other things kept interfering with me being able to get it done. So the steps were clear. The outline was clear, but my process was not clear. So that varied from me joining a writing group, which I ultimately think was the best help. Shout out to Michelle Nelson Hawkins for recommending, get the words together, girl, recommending the book. And then I think the other part that was really important was that I took time off to actually write. Because anytime I have a structured schedule, then those things are going to take precedence. So I'm seeing clients, I got to write notes, I'm doing reports, whatever the case may be. So if I don't have that time off, then even if I say I'm going to write on Fridays, I'm not going to write on Fridays because I guarantee you I'm going to have something that's going to come up that I'm going to need to complete paperwork for. Or someone's going to ask me to present something, or an activity that I'm involved in as a part of community service is going to come up. Oh yeah, I forgot about this. So let me go and run and take care of that. Or I'm going to do basic stuff. Like I need to go to the cleaners, or I need to go to get some alterations, or I need to go to the grocery store. I have this extra time and go take the car in. Let me have these appointments, because those are things I wouldn't necessarily be able to fit in when I'm seeing clients from 8 to 7. So then I need this time to be able to take care of other stuff. So in other words, the process was not practical for me to be able to complete the project. You know I like a good alliteration. Come on, peas. So it's important for you, if you're thinking about whether it's compassion versus you being complacent, is what's your process? Because that process allowed me to say, hey, I'm tired, take this time, go to bed early, get you some rest. You've been plugged in, which is great. I needed that. But what it did not allot for was actually time to write. I had not created a process for that. So then I became complacent, and it ended up being weeks, months, years before I would pick the book back up. So that wasn't really helpful to me reaching the goal. You see how those two tie in. So again, it's great for me to have self-care, but it's also as equally important for me to have a process that I'm being consistent with. That's a practical process, something that I can keep up, something that I can maintain, and something that's going to allow me to reach the steps in the order that I established in the first place. Because again, the outline was clear. The vision was plain. However, the process was not something that was going to allow me to be able to be successful, because it wasn't a fine-tuned process, and it kept fluctuating, which is why I didn't get any consistent results. Which brings me to my next P, patterns. Because I think it's important for us to understand what our patterns are within that process. What am I consistently doing whenever I'm trying to work toward a goal? Again, I'll use myself for an example. I have a pattern, you all know, I've said it before. I love the starches. French fries, chips, popcorn, bread, anything that is going to turn to sugar, essentially, other than the sugar. Love it. Wonderful. My go-to things. However, what ends up happening is those are inconsistent toward the goal of keeping your weight in a certain frame, for being able to make sure that your glucose levels aren't spiking, for ensuring that, because you keep your weight down, you keep your blood pressure down, that I'm not spiking in other areas. They also are not really good for you getting the amount of proteins that you need. And for someone who is iron deficient, then I need to be focusing more on getting those iron components to my diet as opposed to the things that don't really add anything. I love a good pasta. Is it adding much to me? Not so much. Go ahead and get you some quinoa so you can at least get a little bit of protein that go with that starch, right? So these are things that I had to recognize pattern-wise. If you bring it in the house, you're eating it. I'm not one of those people that is going to say, hey, that's a sometimes food. I'm going to want it. I'm going to know that it's in there, and I'm not going to be settled until I can have it. So if I don't have it in there, then I do. You all have seen, I love those videos where people will say the healthy part of me is the one that went grocery shopping, so now I don't have any snacks in here because I don't need those snacks. Girl, put those snacks down. So the good thing about that is, that's again part of the process and part of the plan, that original goal that I had for myself. Then what I'll have is only things that are going to actually meet the goal. So you get mad, let me get some water and go to bed, right? But it allows me to be able to stay on track. So when you identify your patterns, then you're able to problem solve and allow yourself to figure out, okay, well, how then can I change this pattern, ultimately change this process, ultimately stay on track with the plan? And so the pattern discernment is really important part of the journey too, because that goes into us understanding that identity piece. So I shared with you all that sometimes we're engaging in behaviors, we're upset with ourselves about engaging in them, but really they're part of our identity. That's part of how I see myself. So I'm going to give myself a pass. And that pass is where that complacency comes from. Like, it's okay for you to have that. The amount of times you can say it's okay for you to have that, do that, sometimes is part of that pattern that we were talking about as well. Like, I'm allowing myself to constantly cheat because that's what I'm doing. And so that's hard to be able to understand that sometimes I'm practicing cheating. I'm practicing doing things that are outside of what I said my goal was. And I continue to keep giving myself grace with it, which is really just giving myself permission not to reach my goal. And then that becomes a part of my identity. So then I say I don't have self-control. Then I say I'm not a person that follows through and finishes things. Then I say I'm a person that has great ideas, but they don't materialize. Then I say that I'm a person who procrastinates, right? So you're seeing now the identity development is coming from these patterns that I've been practicing. And when I tell you whatever you practice becomes your process, that's what I'm talking about. So it's important for us to be able to be clear about, okay, what is my identity? And if I, in fact, find that my identity is based on these patterns I've been engaging in, and I want to change those patterns in my process, that means I can change my identity. Who do you want to be? And so we talked a little bit about that earlier in the month when we were talking about whatever you plant is going to be what you harvest. So I got to plant different things. I have to think about things differently. I have to change my mindset. I have to really look at what's getting in the way of me being able to have the success I want. So that leads me to the needs assessment piece. It's important for you to assess what are your needs versus what are your wants. My needs are that I do need adequate rest. I do need to have adequate hydration. I do need to exercise. I do need to have good physical habits. I do need to have healthy relationships and healthy boundaries. I do need to be able to have a budget that balances so that I'm not at a default, not default wasn't the word, a deficit, not at a deficit every month, every week, every couple of weeks, because I'm not being a good steward of my resources, mainly because I may not have enough resources to be a good steward of because of some of the choices I've made. Now I've got all of these things I'm trying to pay off, but I didn't account for, I've got to pay these things off, and I still have my regular expenses. And so I need to go back to the drawing table maybe in that needs assessment. So if I need to be able to make sure those ends meet, then I may need to make different decisions about the amount of income I have coming in, as well as the amount of unnecessary expenses that I might have that are going out that I say are part of that, giving myself compassion, like, all right, it's okay, right? Allowing myself to cheat. So when you do that needs assessment and you make decisions based on your needs and not decisions based on your wants, you oftentimes will find that you're not engaging in complacency as much because you're realizing like, hey, I can separate out a need from a want. So I may want to take this time off, but it's not necessarily what I need to do, because I set a goal for myself and I want to be able to reach that goal. And so I'm going to finish this. And then once I finish this, then I'll have an opportunity to make some different decisions about my time. And frequently what we're doing is we're putting ourselves in situations where it's taking longer to meet goals, to get things done, because we keep taking these extra paths. Right? So you all know you've gone walking and they'll have your main path, and then there'll be some things over here like that looks kind of cool, so I'm going to veer off the main path. Well, the more you veer off that main path, the longer it's going to take you to be able to get to the end of that trail. And I think that sometimes we're not necessarily, because we've lost sight of what that goal is, and sometimes we don't have one, focused on, oh wait, my goal is actually to complete this journey in the shortest amount of time, being able to get what I need, and then I can always come back later and look at some of those things that might be a distraction for me right now. So sometimes it's also important to recognize that you're delaying it because it's a distraction in the current moment, but that doesn't mean that you won't be able to come back to it at some point in the future. And oftentimes I have this conversation with people a good bit about relationship sobriety. Because oftentimes what people will do is when they're lonely or when they're hurt from after a relationship ended, they're looking to fill the gap by putting someone else in place, even if they're not necessarily in a space where they should be engaging in a relationship. And so when you take that relationship sobriety, you recognize that I need to have this right now. It doesn't mean that I won't date in the future. It definitely doesn't mean that I have to completely cut out having relationships. But it may be that I recognize that being in a romantic relationship is a distraction to me right now from healing, from focusing on getting some things in order, from being able to really address whatever wounds are present that led to whatever happened in my last relationship. And then in that relationship sobriety, then I get to work on myself and be in this healthy place. So then when it is a need place for me, okay, feel like I'm in a good place, and I need to be in a healthy relationship because that's the space that I'm in now to be able to be a fully realized person. And so I can do my needs assessment and recognize like I need to have some engagement with a partner, and I'm ready to do that, as opposed to I want to have a relationship with a partner even if I don't have anything healthy going on in me right now, and I'm going to take this over and just disrupt somebody's life, or disrupt my own life because I'm operating out of a want, a desire, and not necessarily a need. Because you do want to be in a healthy place when it comes time for you to make decisions about bringing other people into your life. Because again, it's not just you, it affects other people as well as you. And so you want to be mindful of making sure you're in the healthiest space to be able to date. And I find that oftentimes people have the most disastrous consequences in relationships when they're operating out of the want instead of the need. And so now, of course, I'm going to choose people who aren't going to be a good fit for me because I haven't even thoroughly assessed what I need, much less being able to be in a position to assess what somebody else might need. So these steps are just part of this journey. And I understand that there are ebbs and flows when we are trying to figure out who we want to be, where we want to be, how we want to be, with whom we want to be. And I also understand that there are a lot of competing interests. There's a lot of information out there. But I think it's really important for you to first, when we say know yourself, that is not just because we like the way that sounds. That is truly because you need to understand your goals or your purpose, your process, your pattern, your identity, as well as what your needs are in order for you to be able to be successful. And we keep running on that cycle of doing the same thing, having the same results, because we don't have the stability of an anchor. And I think that that's probably one of the things that is most important on this journey is whatever that anchor is, that's the place you're going to come back to. So if your anchor is that you are selfish and self-absorbed, everything's going to come back there because your decisions are going to be based on you being selfish and self-absorbed. If your anchor is that you're codependent and that you have a hard time being able to stand up for yourself and be assertive, then everything is going to come back there. You're going to be frustrated about your relationships. You're going to feel like they're not reciprocal. You're going to feel like you've been taken advantage of. You're going to feel like you really don't have people available around and near you, and that you can't really count on people, and that people only use you for whatever they can get from you. If your anchor is you're a spender, then everything's going to come back to that, because then I'm going to be out here swiping, making decisions because it's something that I want, and then I don't really have the resources to be able to support that. So now I'm going to be short in some areas, or I'm going to have to overwork myself to be able to try to pay some things off. I'm going to have to check out some loans or do some other things in order for me to be able to get from out the situation, which is going to be temporary. One of my former pastors said, Christopher Waller, Reverend Waller said, you cannot borrow your way out of debt. And that's a true statement, because you're going to just keep being a borrower, and you're not going to get outside of that, because every time you get in a situation, borrowing is going to be that anchor. So that's what you're going to go to. And so you're going to be in that chronic cycle of debt, constantly giving pain, trying to figure out how to navigate something. I will also say to you that if your anchor is faith, if your anchor is in hope, if your anchor is in trying to be the best version of yourself that you can be, you're always going to come back there too. So the anchor doesn't have to be a negative thing. It can absolutely be a positive thing. And then my recommendation for you is that it's something positive, that you have a mantra, that you have a faith-based system, that you have a guideline, a code that you're living by as your anchor. So then all of your goal, your process, your pattern, your identity, your needs assessment are all tied to that anchor. That way, when the storms come, because they are coming, there are going to be challenges, as the younger people say, life is going to life on you. Then you have that anchor to be able to guide you, so then you're not going all over the place, as we say, paper flapping in the wind. So wherever the wind blows, that's where you go. You won't be distracted. You won't get off course as often when you have those things that are allowing you to stay in alignment with what you said you were doing, how you said you were doing it, why you said you were doing it, with whom you said you were doing it, and for why, your purpose. Right? So in this season of trying to figure out compassion versus complacency, compassion allows you to be able to understand what your needs are, separate them from your wants, and allows you to stay in alignment with your goals. Complacency allows you to do what you want to do when you want to do it, justifying for you that it's okay for you to do it because you've already accepted the identity of you're not going to complete things. So make good choices and be well.